On the 18th of June, 2020, the chief operating officer of Germany's most valuable tech company told his colleagues he was flying to Manila to personally find the 1.9 billion euros that had gone missing from the balance sheet. He never boarded a flight to Manila. The travel records placing him in the Philippines were faked. That night, a private jet left a small Austrian airfield, heading east to Minsk. Here is what the company found while he was in the air. The 1.9 billion euros wasn't missing. It had never existed. Not stolen, not lost. Invented, for years, under the noses of Germany's regulators, auditors, and government. By the end of that week, the company was worthless. And the man on the jet? He is now accused of being a Russian spy, and he is still free. This is built and broken. To understand the crash, you need to understand the prayer. Germany builds cars, machines, chemicals, but it never built a Google. No German Apple, no German Amazon, a national insecurity measured in trillions. Then, in a grey suburb of Munich, appeared the answer: Wirecard. A payments company that started out processing credit cards for the two businesses no bank wanted to touch: pornography and online gambling. Its chief executive, Braun, an Austrian who wore black turtlenecks and quoted visions of a cashless future, rebuilt it into something respectable. The fintech that moved money for airlines, supermarkets, phone companies, everywhere, invisibly, skimming a fraction of every transaction. In September 2018, Wirecard entered the DAX, the 30 most valuable companies in Germany, kicking out Commerzbank, a 150-year-old institution. At its peak, Wirecard was worth 24 billion euros. For one giddy moment, it was worth more than Deutsche Bank. Germany finally had its tech champion, which is exactly why nobody wanted to look inside it. Because someone did look. In 2015, a journalist at the Financial Times named Dan McCrum started pulling at Wirecard's numbers and found they didn't add up. He called the series House of Wirecard. For his trouble, he got surveillance, smear campaigns, and lawyers. In January 2019, a whistleblower inside the Singapore office handed McCrum something harder: evidence of forged contracts and money moved in circles to inflate revenue. The FT published. The stock fell. Now, pause. In every fraud story, this is the moment the regulator steps in. Germany's regulator, BaFin, did step in. Against the journalists, BaFin banned short-selling of Wirecard shares for 2 months, the first time in German history the state had shielded a single company that way. Then it filed criminal complaints against the FT reporters. The German press called the story an Anglo-Saxon attack on a national champion. Wirecard had gone one better. It borrowed the German state itself, and the state showed up to defend it. Here is how you invent €1 billion. On paper, half of Wirecard's business ran through third-party partners, obscure companies in Dubai and Manila that supposedly processed payments in countries where Wirecard had no license. The profits from these partners didn't sit in Wirecard's own accounts. They sat in escrow, trust accounts, held far away in the Philippines, managed by a lawyer. Auditors would ask, "Where's the money?" Wirecard would produce letters, official, stamped, signed, confirming the balances. Year after year, the auditors at EY accepted the letters and signed the accounts. For over a decade. The genius wasn't complexity, it was distance. The money always lived somewhere just far enough away, another country, another time zone, another bank, that checking felt unnecessary. The letters looked real. The stamps looked real. In October 2019, the pressure finally forced Wirecard to invite a second opinion, a special audit by KPMG. 6 months later, KPMG delivered its verdict in the polite language of accountants. For enormous parts of the business, we cannot verify that the profits exist. The stock wobbled. The company blamed misunderstanding. One signature stood between Wirecard and the abyss, EY's, on the 2019 accounts. In June 2020, for the first time in years of audits, EY did the simplest thing imaginable. It went around the letters and asked the two Philippine banks directly, Do you hold 1.9 billion euros in escrow for Wirecard? Both banks gave the same answer. The documents are forged. This company has never been our client. June 18th, EY refuses to sign. The missing money makes headlines. Braun appears in a video blaming, incredibly, the auditors. June 19th, Braun resigns. June 22nd, the company issues the most extraordinary statement in German corporate history. The 1.9 billion euros, a quarter of its entire balance sheet, likely does not exist. That evening, Braun is arrested. June 25th, Wirecard files for insolvency. The first DAX company ever to collapse into bankruptcy. 98% of its value gone in a week. Pension funds, index funds, small savers who bought the German tech champion, all holding ash. 18 days. That's all it took. Once one person asked one question to the right address. But you're still waiting on the jet. Jan Marsalek, Chief Operating Officer, the man who ran the third-party business, the man with the answers, was fired on June 18th. He told colleagues he'd fly to Manila and clear everything up. Immigration records in the Philippines dutifully showed him arriving. Those records were planted. He was never there. Instead, the small airfield at Bad Vöslau, Austria, a private jet. Minsk, then Moscow, and a new life under Russian protection. And then the story stops being a business story. British and German investigators discovered that for years, Marsalek had been more than an executive. His Munich villa sat near the Russian consulate. He had boasted of holding secret chemical weapons documents. And from Moscow, prosecutors say, he ran a ring of Bulgarian spies in Britain, surveilling journalists and dissidents, 6 of whom have now been convicted in London. Investigations found him living in Moscow under a false identity, reportedly at one point using the papers of an Orthodox priest, and he has been traced traveling near the front line in Ukraine. The chief operating officer of a DAX company, now one of the most wanted men in Europe, and entirely out of reach. Who pays then? Markus Braun has been in custody since 2020. His fraud trial in Munich began in December 2022 and is still running. One of the longest white-collar trials in German history. He maintains he was the victim, deceived like everyone else. The auditors were fined and banned from new listed company audits. The regulator was rebuilt. The law was rewritten. And the money? You cannot recover money that never existed. Wirecard borrowed the strongest machinery of all, a stock index, an audit signature, and a national dream, and Germany defended the fraud harder than it investigated it. And somewhere in Moscow, the man who invented 1.9 billion euros is still writing his story in someone else's name. Built and broken. Subscribe. The next collapse is already in the archive.